Nō mai, haere mai, welcome. I'm Bruce Munro. With me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. This week, New Zealand has been strongly rebuked by China's ambassador, Dr. Wang Xiaolong, for supporting a United Nations ruling that rejects China's claims to the South China Seas. Why is China so angry? Welcome, Robert.
Morena, Bruce. Thank you.
What's the background to the ambassador's claim that New Zealand has seriously undermined its relationship with China?
I think the background could be essentially traced to about 2009, when China, in the wake of the global financial crisis, declared that the South China Sea, and here China has a historical claim to about 90% of that region, that China's claim to the South China Sea was a core national interest. And the US responded within a year by saying that the freedom of navigation within the South China Sea was a core American and Western interest. Since then, we've seen a steady escalation in the South China Sea. We had what was called the pivot to the Asia Pacific, now the Indo-Pacific, launched by the Obama administration in 2011, which was really trying to balance China's increasing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly the South China Sea. And then in 2013, 2014, we had China reclaiming land and also building artificial islands in the South China Sea, and also installing military installations on those artificial islands. And there's a number of other parties to claims on the South China Sea. These include, for example, Taiwan, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And the Philippines was deeply concerned by the fact that China was essentially trying to grab the lion's share of this disputed region. And as a result, it launched legal action, which was heard at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the world's top court in The Hague for maritime disputes. And the court found in favour of the Philippines and ruled that China's claim to much of the South China Sea lacked historical foundation, in the court's words. But China remained defiant and didn't recognise the findings of the court. Immediately after the ruling, New Zealand, a major trade partner of China, and Germany, another major trade partner of Germany, both Germany and New Zealand urged China to accept the findings of the court, the ruling of the court, and something which China has steadfastly refused to do.
Right. So now we're at the 10th anniversary of that ruling, and New Zealand, along with other countries, has affirmed its commitment to that ruling and its support of that ruling. And China has responded strongly. Its ambassador has issued this rebuke. What do we make of Dr. Xiaolong's comments? And can I read them for a moment?
Sure. Just
an excerpt. China has never chosen to hurt the interests of New Zealand in the past, nor is it our intention to do so in the future. However, it takes two to tango, and no one should underestimate our resolve and capability to defend our legitimate rights and interests. What do we make of those comments?
It's a selective understanding of it takes two to tango. And what I mean by that is, he says that China has never taken any actions which could hurt New Zealand. New Zealand, with its attachment to a rules-based international order, would see the actions of a superpower ignoring the rulings of an independent and authoritative court, with special reference to maritime disputes. It would see China's actions as actually a challenge to New Zealand's interests. So I think that's important to clarify, and that's why many other countries in the region have been alarmed by New Zealand, by China's refusal to accept the rulings of the court. So I think we do have to put that in context. Dr. Xiaolong may not see the China's position as being a challenge to other countries. Those countries do. And this is a really important point to establish. It is true that the Chinese ambassador has moved into unusual territory. It's unusual for a Chinese ambassador to be so outspoken about an aspect of New Zealand's foreign policy. I think New Zealand was quite right. If it's going to support a rules-based international order, it has to support those institutions which have some role in upholding that order. So I think New Zealand's position, along with 13 other countries, in marking the 10th anniversary of the ruling which the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled in favour of the Philippines, is absolutely right to mark that anniversary and reaffirm the importance of sorting out such maritime disputes through authoritative, independent means of arbitration. But I think the ambassador, I think one of the things that moved the ambassador to speak out was that this is seen in Beijing as an absolutely fundamental key issue. Right. And they're not going to take a backward step on this issue. And I think they're serving warning to New Zealand that they believe that New Zealand's attachment to a rules-based order, as seen through the eyes of Beijing, is inconsistent with what Beijing sees as its legitimate national interests in the South China Sea. Now, so this is quite unusual for the Chinese ambassador to speak out. To be fair, Chinese diplomats have often spoken out, although not at such a senior level, on such issues when New Zealand's been considering membership of AUKUS, for example. It's still considering membership of AUKUS, so that's an ongoing saga. But it's quite an unusual step by the ambassador.
And trying to dig into why China is so sensitive about South China Sea issues, how much of China's what appears to be aggressive behaviour is driven by the fact that the United States has more than 70 military bases and more than 100,000 military personnel in that South China Sea area?
Well, yes, I think that China is trying to send a message to the United States, its global audience, particularly the United States. And it's engaged in a process of military modernisation. That process has been going on since the early 2000s. China spends about a third of what the United States does on military capabilities. But it is trying to indicate by taking quite a firm stance over the South China Sea that it is not going to waver in its determination to make its claim. Why does it do this? Because it believes it's entitled to the same perks that other superpowers has. For example, Mr. Trump has made it quite clear that he wants to make the United States, to use Trump's words, the boss of the Western Hemisphere. The reassertion of the Munro doctrine. In other words, great powers tend to see regional dominance as a key benchmark for their progress. So China is seeing its dominance of the South China Sea region as an important step for it. I think there's a couple of other things though. First of all, Xi Jinping is also anxious, I think, to say to a domestic audience that China is growing and it will not be humiliated by foreign powers. It will continue to assert itself. And if New Zealand does anything that can be seen as contrary to that stance, then it will make it clear to New Zealand. I think the other thing here is that the Trump administration has inadvertently boosted Xi Jinping's government. And one of the reasons that Chinese officials, including the Chinese ambassador to New Zealand, feel free to speak out with greater freedom than before to defend Chinese interests in the South China Sea is because China sees Trump as weak, disorganized, and pursuing an incoherent foreign policy. Where does the perception of weakness come from? It comes from the fact that Mr. Trump has tried to force Zelensky to give in to Putin's territorial demands in Ukraine. And China is a major enabler in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And these issues are connected. China's assertiveness, whether it be in relation to the South China Sea, Hong Kong or Taiwan, is directly linked to what it sees as American determination to uphold its position. The fact that America has sided with an authoritarian regime against a democracy that's been illegally invaded shows weakness in Chinese eyes. The most powerful country in the world seeking to pay homage to a country like Russia with an economy of about the size of Italy. So the Chinese believe that they can assert themselves in the Trump era. They are skeptical that Mr. Trump, unlike Biden, would come to the defense of Taiwan. And also, they think Trump basically is a showman, not a serious politician. So they're going to take advantage of this. So that's another factor, independent of Chinese the US military capabilities in the region, which are considerable.
How should New Zealand play its part in this?
I think New Zealand's position should be consistent and robust in upholding international law. The problem is, Bruce, we've been pretty one-eyed about our willingness to do this. I think it's great that New Zealand has reaffirmed its support for the findings or the rulings of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. I think it's absolutely right to do that. It's important to say to China, you can't you simply can't assert power arbitrarily when the rules work against you. At the same time, New Zealand was not so forthcoming when the United States and Israel flagrantly broke international law, contravened international law, and attacked a sovereign state, Iran, on the 28th of February this year. We largely blamed Iran for the actions of a country which had broken international law. So, unfortunately, this inconsistency will also register with China. In short, had we been more consistent, our willingness to mark the 10th anniversary of the rulings of the Permanent Court of Arbitration would have been much more effective if we'd been upholding international law in places like Gaza and in the Middle East generally, and then also in the South China Sea. So I do think the government may think it can have its cake and eat it. That is to say that it can be selective about which international laws it can uphold. I think this example shows that it does have a cost. Nothing is cost-free in this world. And so being inconsistent could boomerang against New Zealand's national interests.
Thanks, Robert. And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Noho ora mai.